Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of light and secret knowledge wherever you may be, you are listening to Points of Light Radio, the podcast dedicated to taking you past the apron and behind the closed doors of lodges everywhere. And here is your host, Stan Miller.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. It's wonderful to be back with you here on Points of Light Radio and continuing our journey of fellowship and discovery. And I'd just like to know, how have you been enjoying this so far? I'd like to see some comments, in the comment section here about how you feel about this journey. And I do appreciate, I might add, some of the input and some of the suggestions that I'm seeing in the comment section on here on YouTube, especially, where people are really leaving me some of their feedback. And I am trying to get in touch with some of those organizations that they're suggesting. But I'm going to be continuing my journey by revisiting the loyal orders. Now, if you recall, in previous segments of Points of Light Radio, I have featured and fellowshipped with some of their members. On June 20th, I spoke with my buddy, Owen Snowden, from the Loyal Orange Lodge over in the UK, one of many different fraternal organizations that he belongs to. And I will, just to give you the heads up, I will be featuring him here again in the very near future on Points of Light Radio. My July 18th segment of Points of Light Radio, I featured Sir Knight Thomas from the World Black Preceptories in Ontario West. And on October 21st, I visited an old friend and brother, Paul Allen, from the Loyal Orange Lodge in Guelph, Ontario. Right? And today, we're going to be talking about the Ancient and Illustrious Order of the Knights of Malta. From here on, and I'm just going to talk about them as the Knights of Malta. But this is the predecessor and parent of the Royal Black Institution. They have three goals: to protect, promote, and practice. First of all, protect the rights of others. Second of all, promote the Reformed Protestant faith. And thirdly, practice practical faith in action. Now, I'll let my guest shed a little more light on this. My guest for this particular segment is Will Wilkinson. He's a member of a number of the Loyal Orders. I recently became a member at large of the McNeilstown True Blues Independent Loyal Orange Lodge, number 46 in Portalone, Northern Ireland, of which he's a member. But he's here today to talk specifically about his membership in the Ancient and Illustrious Order of the Knights of Malta. Okay, like I said, from here on in, we'll refer to them as the Knights of Malta, right? And I can't wait to get together with him, because this is going to be like getting together with a new friend. I recently, like I said, got to know him a little better, and this is going to be great. Let's go talk to Mr. Wilkinson. Are you still searching for the light? Are you still hungry for knowledge? Then just trim your lamp and follow me. Mr. Wilkinson, welcome to Points of Light Radio.
Dan, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
You hear me? Apologies.
That's okay. But you're a member of the Ancient and Illustrious Order of Knights of Malta. Why don't you tell my listeners a little bit about yourself first?
Hi, I'm Will. I live in Northern Ireland. I have been involved with the Knights of Malta, I suppose, for almost 3 decades, something of a family tradition. I am a consultant in the community and voluntary sector by day, and a member of a number of the loyal orders, but I suppose the Knights of Malta would be the oldest and most interesting, in my opinion.
Okay. And how long have you been a member of the Knights of Malta?
Yeah, almost 3. I was counting it up today, about 27 years.
Whoa.
17 would be the entry age. Very much like many of the orders over here.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about the Knights of Malta. What exactly do they do?
They are a fraternity. They try and maintain those ancient traditions of supporting the poor and the sick. They are a Protestant fraternity. Many of your watchers, listeners will know of a range of organizations that bear that name, the majority of which would be Roman Catholic organizations. A number of Knights of Malta, particularly in Germany, at the time of the Reformation, and in Scotland, where we would draw our point of origin, converted to Protestantism, and that would be the main difference. Otherwise, what people would perhaps be more commonly aware of, the St. John's Ambulance, various hospitals, various charities, we would maintain those same principles and that same ethos, but very much would see it as an order for the promotion of the Protestant faith. And that is, I suppose, where our path has taken us in a very different direction to some of the other Knights of Malta around the world. And we today would provide support for members, charitable work for the wider community, and really a place for members, for a local community to celebrate, to commemorate their faith, and to study and become stronger in it. I suppose just to read the Declaration of Principles, it's always good to refresh yourself after a lot of decades what you joined up for. It says, the Order of Knights of Malta is a body of men banded together under most binding forms to comfort one another in the practice of the Christian religion, to offer mutual assistance in time of need, to promote Protestant unity, to defend the Protestant faith against all foes whatsoever, to ever defend civil and religious liberty, to exercise the fullest toleration and charity towards all men, to practice benevolence, and to maintain a universal Protestant fraternity. So I suppose one of the unique features that I have seen in the history of the institution is that international aspect. Some of our other loyal orders in Northern Ireland are quite insular in a way, but have spread internationally. It's almost the reverse in terms of the Knights of Malta, in that historically they've always been an international order that have become rooted primarily in Scotland, but now very much in Northern Ireland. And from there have spread. We still have, we would call them in Northern Ireland, encampments. In America, they would be called commanderies. And we have only recently, after I suppose a few years of broken contact, renewed fellowship with some of those commanderies down in the United States.
Okay. Now, what are the requirements? You mentioned one of them, of course, you have to be Protestant, but what are the requirements for membership in the Knights of Malta? Like, can a Orangeman, shall we say, from just not just the Independent Orange, but the other Orange Lodge or the Royal Black Preceptory, can they join the Knights of Malta?
Very much so. Again, this is perhaps a unique feature. Our understanding of the evolution of loyal orders here in Ireland and the United Kingdom generally would place the Malta as the oldest of those orders, and from that root many have sprang forth. So Your listeners, your watchers may be aware, obviously, of the Orange Institution and also of the Royal Black. The Royal Black is very much, I suppose, a descendant of the Knights of Malta.
Oh.
The main difference that we would have is that in the Black, for example, you must be an Orangeman, and what they would call is, I suppose, a higher degree within the Orange Order, the Royal Arch Purple chapter. You must progress through that and then achieve entry into the Black. They're effectively that, I suppose, explains a lot about the origin of those two organizations and perhaps where they fit in the lineage. The Malta do not have that requirement because they hold themselves to be older than both those orders. So there is no qualification and there is no entry through another organization. The qualification is purely to adhere to the Protestant faith. And that certainly does open membership to all of the loyal orders. Unfortunately, the Royal Black debar their members from joining, and we can perhaps understand because of the close similarity between the two and something of a rivalry over who came first and who didn't, and that makes it difficult, certainly for members of the Orange Order who would see a natural progression into the Black. At one stage, there was a change of rules in the Malta to align it more closely with the Orange Institution, but that was felt not to be in the best interests of the Malta. And to some extent, we probably have suffered considerably as a result of that. I think the connection between the Orange and the Black and that progression has certainly helped that organization. And it's very obvious that today, when you see parades, when you see numbers, when you see the number of Black preceptories in Northern Ireland and internationally in comparison to the Malta, it's obvious that that decision to hitch their wagon to the Orange Order has paid dividends in terms of membership. The other issue, I suppose, which impacted heavily on the Malta was because there was no official linkage, whenever there was a split in Orangeism in 1903 and the Independent Orange Institution was formed, the Malta there was a demand made by the Orange Order that the Malta refused to accept members of this dissident or breakaway Orange Order. The Malta refused to acquiesce and stated their rules as being that any Protestant of sound standing and good faith could join. And again, there was a point of friction over that. So today, interestingly, we would see a connection, nothing formal, nothing structural, but just by way of tradition and by just practicality, that many members of the Independent Orange Institution would be members of the Knights of Malta, and members of the Orange Order would progress into the Black. Although that is probably something that has evolved over the last 50 years. In a lot of research we're doing, we can see very strong connections between Malta encampments and Orange lodges, mainstream Orange lodges, right through until about the Second World War. And again, for a number of reasons, the Malta found that post-war period particularly difficult.
Well, do you have a degree system in the Knights of Malta?
Yeah, we have a degree system. And again, it's probably one of those proofs of a greater antiquity for the Malta that they have retained 12 distinct degrees, whereas I believe the Black possibly have lost one in their development. The degree structure is very similar, if listeners or watchers are aware of the Black, because, as I say, that organisation would have, under William Johnson of Ballyculbeg in the 1870s, probably taken many of those Black degrees, brought them into that organisation, and that, I suppose, was the basis of the Black.
Okay. But basically they follow that same progression of
very, very similar. I'm obviously not party to Black initiations, but from my understanding and reading, yes, I believe that we would perhaps charitably say that they have borrowed many of the Malta degrees. I don't think there is a big difference. The names might be slightly different. I imagine that certainly the scriptural basis for them, and we would, fraternally pay tribute to the Black in terms of its Christian principles and stand. We stand structurally and institutionally separate, but very much in terms of faith and practice and ethos, very similar, very supportive, I believe, of one another.
Now, where does your encampment meet then? When you say they're not allowed into Orange Lodges anymore to meet, so you can't share that space, I guess.
That, again, has led to probably a practical affiliation or a practical relationship with independent Orange institution. Most of our encampments would meet in independent Orange halls. Again, at that point of split within the Orange Order, organizations were asked to, I suppose, take sides. I'm not sure what the final decision was, but the apprentice boys, for example, would have been asked to take sides in that Orange split at one stage. I'm not sure what their final position was, but the Malta remained above that split. But even in remaining neutral, it was assumed by the Grand Orange Lodge of Ireland that they were effectively given support to the breakaway independent institution. And unfortunately, many of the halls in Northern Ireland certainly had been originally built by subscription, and many organizations would have used them. In fact, often when you read of Orange halls as we know them now, a century ago they would have been called Protestant halls. They would have been a sitting place for a number of organizations. So places, for example, like in West Belfast on the Shankill Road, the Malta would have sat in what was, I think, the Earl of Derbyshire, I think it was known as Memorial Hall, or Derby Memorial Hall. It's now West Belfast Orange Hall. And you can read unfortunate news stories of the contest for who had the right to use it. And effectively, in many cases, the Malta, perhaps as minority owners or as minority subscribers to these buildings, were denied usage of them. So they did find a home. So where our encampment, as I say, one of the differences in terms of language is we would refer to ourselves not as RBP, Royal Black Preceptories, as the Royal Black would call them, their lodges or whatever. We would refer to ours as encampments, Royal Black encampments. So I'm a member of David's Chosen Few, number 21. And we meet just outside a village in North Antrim, in way up near, probably for your audience, and given the distances that there are in Canada, we would count it as a good drive to the north coast, but probably in your terms, it's only around the corner. We're very close, if the audience knows the Giant's Causeway. So we're quite close to the north coast of Ireland. And we have been meeting in that hall for almost a century now.
Well, what's the makeup of your encampment now? Young, old, how many people?
Again, it is like many of the fraternal orders aging. I would say I'm probably around the midpoint. We, in the last few years, have received maybe 4 or 5 young initiates, and that, I suppose, is welcome. But no, we range from, I think the oldest would be in their mid-80s, the youngest would be in their mid-20s. So we can certainly see a slide towards that older end of the spectrum.
How many of them?
We would have, I think, 17 on our books.
And what do you call them? What do you call them? Like, do you call them knights? Like the Black calls them knights? Do you call them?
Yes, we would call them knights. To confuse matters further, there is, I suppose, a higher system within the Malta, which is known as the Great Cross, and their members. It's I suppose best described as an order of merit. Their members would be referred to as shepherds.
Okay.
But yes, Sir Knight in the same way as the Black.
Now, do you march? I know the orange goes on the 12th. I believe the Black has Scarva over here. The Black
is Scarva. I don't believe there's any historical significance to the date of Scarva or the location. It may actually be linked to King William's progress through Ulster towards the Boyne. But the Malta, interestingly, would have marked St. John's Day. Okay. That would be something that would have been shared with the Black, and also shared, I think, with the Masonic in years past. Today, our 2 high points of the year are an event in May known as a Beacon Parade, and that marks the landing of John Knox in Scotland, and the lighting of what we would call the fire of the Reformation. What's, I suppose, particularly important to the identity of the Knights of Malta is that link to the Reformation. It's, as a name, as I said earlier, in many people's understanding and experience, the Knights of Malta is something that they would very much associate with the Roman Catholic faith. Something that people historically have seen, and the papacy have quite interestingly retaken control over that order in recent years over a number of issues. And it's something probably in Protestant Ulster that we have again suffered for, I suppose, guilt by association, perhaps. And the Protestant credentials have always been questioned, and it's always perhaps an easy point of criticism or attack. So we're particularly proud of our Protestant heritage, and that origin point for the Protestant Knights of Malta takes us back to that Reformation period. In the 1550s in Scotland, Scotland was a separate kingdom from England, and as the Reformation took hold in the British Isles, it was very much a top-down process in England, and in Ireland it was imposed in a way by Henry VIII, and it was marked by, for example, the dissolution of monasteries and the dismantling of Catholic orders. So where there were Knights Hospitallers or Knights of Malta in England and in Ireland, they largely remained affiliated with the Roman Catholic Church, and they were dismantled, their property confiscated, their houses dissolved under royal command by Henry VIII. So the lineage and the history of the Knights Hospitallers, the Knights of St. John, ended effectively in England and in Ireland under Henry VIII's reign. And whereas under Queen Victoria in later centuries, those chivalric orders were revived, we in Scotland, and tracing origins back to the Scottish order, there was no dissolution, because in the 1500s until 1603, Scotland was a separate kingdom, separate laws, separate crown. And at that stage in its history, there was a mighty contest between Protestantism and Catholicism. Scotland was something of a client state to France, and the crown and the Queen of Scotland were very much affiliated to the Roman Catholic faith. John Knox and many of the nobles of Scotland obviously adhered to the Protestant faith. But around the middle of that century, it was very much an even contest. The crown had got an army, it had got French support, and whilst the people were flocking to the Protestant faith, it was not a foregone conclusion that Scotland would be Protestant. And it was at that stage that nobles and anyone who could press home the advantage of Protestantism was welcome in that cause, and alongside Knox. And one of Knox's greatest supporters was a Scottish noble called Sir James Sandilands. Sandilands was from an old family just outside of Edinburgh, but what he was uniquely placed as a reformer was he was also Grand Master of the Knights Hospitallers in Scotland. And it was his conversion to Protestantism, it was his bringing on board with that Reformation project the Knights Hospitallers that certainly added to the pressure that led to the Protestantism of Scotland. So it was that conversion personally that led to the institution, the Knights Hospitallers, the Knights of St. John, becoming a Protestant order. There's a lot of historical debate over what their relationship with the Knights in Malta was, but I can certainly find no historical evidence to show that that led to an expulsion or it led to a breach. And it would appear that both in Scotland and also in Protestant lands in Germany, the Knights Hospitallers or the Knights of St. John or the Knights of Malta actually followed the faith of the Reformers, and that was not sufficient to lead to a breach. So I suppose, like many fraternal orders, we do look for what we would call transmission to see how our lineage has passed from generation to generation. Every, I think, fraternal order looks to try and secure or at least study that chain of transmission. And so that would be where we start. So interestingly, just for any history buffs, we have, I suppose, probably one of our most, I don't know if anybody can see at this scale, one of our most, I suppose, precious artifacts is the seal of Sir James Sandilands. I'm not sure if that's in any way clear.
Okay.
So this would have been, it's actually known as a cipher, I suppose.
Yeah.
They used to imprint on wax seals, on documents, orders, whatever. So that, I suppose, is a very tangible piece of history from that point that the order holds quite dear to it. And our, I suppose, point of origin in terms of our Protestantism would be that conversion and that role within the Reformation in Scotland.
I do want to ask you though about that. You said the Knights of Columbia, the Knights of Malta, disappeared. And it survived in the families of Scottish Knights and may be the origins of Masonry. Now, you said that many Orange historians who are also Masons have promoted the idea that Orange degrees, rituals, and structures were borrowed from Masonry, and that many of its founders and members were Masons. But there is little or no evidence for this, and the issue is obscured. And the real question is, which is from where, and did Masonry find its degrees in symbolism and structure? So you're actually disagreeing with that by the sounds of things, that they say Orangeism got its degree system from Masonry and things.
Yeah, I suppose I have either the privilege or the curse of being a historian by trade, and I'm a political historian, so I put it to some use in career. But as a hobby historian, it is Orangeism, its origins, and these sadly more obscure fraternal organizations that entertain me in research these days. Yes, as a historian, I was always taught never to simply accept tradition as fact, and it has grown into something of a accepted truth that that Masonry was the point of origin for the degree structures within Orangeism. There is a grey area over then how black degrees and other degrees came to be practiced within Orangeism, but it's fairly common truth that by the middle of the 1800s, Orangeism had a very muddled ritual and degree practice, and it was the work of an individual called William Johnson of Ballykilbeg, who's something of a Protestant, I suppose, icon. He was a member of the minor gentry, member of Parliament. He famously challenged the government on their parade legislation and how it restricted parading. He served a short prison sentence and became something of a folk hero. But he took the task upon himself to take out those higher degrees, as they were called, that had been sort of practiced in a very hodgepodge way within Orangeism in the mid-1800s, and collect them together into a separate structure and organization, and that was what became the Black. Those degrees had to come from somewhere. They certainly weren't imagined and devised by William Johnson in the mid-1800s. So the challenge to historians is to find out just where they came from and why they became affiliated with Orangeism. And the perceived wisdom is that they were borrowed from Masonry. That early Orange men were either Masons, or another term, hedge Masons, in that they had either been unofficially initiated or they had been members and had been expelled or had left, but continued to practice effectively behind the hedge, not in a sanctioned lodge room. And they took the structures, they took much of the terminology and symbolism from Masonry. And that's an easy fit, and it's a simple and easy answer, but I'm never a great believer in simple, easy answers. I think it takes us back to the Masonic order itself, and we need to challenge, I suppose, or have a conversation with them as to where they genuinely believe their degrees, symbolism, rituals derived from. And again, when we explore that issue, we do disappear into the mists of time. We realize that there are various influences on their structures, on their systems. And I certainly would throw out the challenge to Masonic historians, to Orange historians, that could we explore the possibility that many of these degrees originated in Scotland, and where how the Knights Hospitallers or Knights of Malta rituals and practices were preserved in that period after the death of Sir James Sandilands, when we know that the order was preserved within a number of families within Scotland, and certainly had an influence in the Scottish court in the early 1600s. And it's very obvious that it is difficult to tease out the origins, but there is clearly a central point, a central fountain from which much of this symbolism, structure, and ritual derived.
Okay. Well, you're also a member of some of the other loyal orders or some other fraternal orders. What are they, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, as I say, from a family perspective, we have long been members of the Knights Hospitallers, the Knights of St. John, Knights of Malta. But when that split in Orangeism happened, our family became founder members in our locality of the Independent Orange Order. So it is probably, as I say, out of no structural arrangements between the two, but out of family connections, out of practicalities, that the two became quite close. So yeah, I would be a member of the Independent Orange Institution.
So, but what is membership, not just in the Knights of Malta, but in the loyal orders? What has it done for you?
I think I'll start. History has always been an interest and has always been a passion. And I think for me, history is something that brings the past to life. As a historian, the past feels perhaps closer and more relevant to me than other people. Some people hated history in school. For me, it struck a chord. And I suppose at one level, these organizations are a very direct and tangible link back to the past. And some of these artifacts, in some of our practices, in some of our ritual, and even in terms of just the social connection between previous generations. I think it just gives you a very strong connection to your own past and to a heritage that I think is very, very important. I think membership of any organization is something that we perhaps derive from family tradition, and that is a strong motivator for me. But in a modern age, we're all busy. We all have, despite technology, no more time than ever. So I think we're perhaps all more critical of how we spend our spare time and what we do for our own fulfillment. So I, like everybody in my generation, have probably had a point where I've questioned how I spend my time, what value is this organization? And unfortunately, I think many people asked not what does this organization do, but what does this organization do for me? And I think that probably was my wake-up moment when I realized, well, I don't particularly need it to do anything for me. I know it does, but I think there is a value in contributing back to organizations like this. So it's probably that old JFK quote, not what my country can do for me, but what I can do for it. So I think I've always perhaps been brought up with that sense of maybe civic responsibility. And for me, civic responsibility is best actioned through fraternal organizations like this. I hope that whatever education or skills or life experience I have, that it can be reinvested back in an organization like this and can be of benefit to others. And I suppose finally and centrally, faith. To me, I see my involvement in the loyal orders and in fraternal organizations like this very much an expression of my personal faith. It's faith in action to me, that we can all, I suppose, benefit from going to church, from sitting in church, from expressing our faith through that. But this is perhaps something more practical. So it's an expression of it, whether we're on parade, whether we're involved in outreach through these organizations. I am a very firm believer that Protestantism has always had to defend itself, both physically and academically. And I think these organizations have proven themselves over generations to be at the fore of that defense and promotion.
Well, Mr. Wilkinson, I appreciate your time today, and all the best to you and your the Knights of Malta.
Thank you very much. Keep up the good work, Stan. It's great to see. It's great to have an outlet and to reach out internationally, and it's valuable at work. I suppose I have a question for you. How did you get interested in these organizations? This is a big time commitment for you in terms of running the station, putting together interviews, chasing down interviews.
I really do. I really do feel that we have to preserve the history and raise the profile of these organizations. It'd be a shame to see them. They are part of the history. They really are. They're part of man's history, and I think we have to keep it that way.
I agree. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Will Wilkinson, brothers and sisters, shedding some light on the Knights of Malta. It's not hard to tell he's a historian, is it? I mean, I really appreciate it, how he really broke it down for us, the origins of the Knights of Malta, as well as some other aspects of the loyal orders. And I'll tell you right, I mean, I want to know, how do you feel about his views on the history and connections between Masonic and Orange history? Right, I'd love to know how you feel. I know that, and if you recall, in my first segment of points that I did on the Orange Lodge, I did mention, if you recall, that the Orange Lodge may have been founded in 1795, but some of those dates are fuzzy. There were Orange societies, it's a known fact, within Europe prior to 1795. Okay, so I mean, it kind of lines up with what I said, and I don't doubt in many ways that they may have borrowed Freemasonry and Orangeism may have borrowed ideas, I feel personally, and this is my take on it, from one another, but I do not feel that Orangeism has all of its roots personally in Freemasonry. Now, if you are a Freemason or you are an Orangeman, or if you're both for that matter, I'd love to hear your take on that. Okay, because that's quite interesting. And as I said, it was also interesting hearing about the Knights of Malta. I mean, had you ever heard of them? I can almost guarantee you that most people, including those in the Orange orders on this side of the Atlantic, have probably never heard of the Knights of Malta, at least not the Protestant version of the Knights of Malta. I mean, I personally hadn't until I reached out to Mr. Wilkinson. And we'll definitely have to have him back, right? But unfortunately, I do have to leave it there for the time being. But before I go, I want to remind you that this podcast is available on both YouTube and Spreaker. Please share, like, and subscribe when viewing Points of Light Radio on YouTube. You can follow Points of Light Radio on my Facebook page at facebook.com/Points of Light Radio. My Twitter handle is at PO Light Radio. You can see the link to my Spotify channel, as well as my Points of Light Radio store. Brothers and sisters, I'm sorry to part with you. It's been a pleasure being with you. I'm sorry to part from you, but until we meet again, all the best. Just step into the light.